It was a Monday morning at Fairway Supermart, and the air buzzed with the usual activity of carts rolling, scanners beeping, and customers bustling about. But behind checkout lane 6, something didn't feel right. The line moved slowly, and at the end of it stood a young black woman named Alisha, quietly wiping her tears while trying to maintain her composure. Her hands trembled as she scanned groceries, offering forced smiles in between quick glances toward the store manager's office. What no one knew, yet, was that the company's CEO, Mr. James Alden, had walked in just 10 minutes earlier. But he wasn't wearing a suit. He was dressed in a faded green polo, khaki pants, and a name tag that said Jim. He was undercover, filming for an internal employee assessment program, trying to understand the day-to-day reality of his staff. Hidden cameras dotted the store, and most of the employees had no idea their CEO was working among them. As James walked past the bakery aisle, he heard someone whisper, "She's gonna cry again. Can't handle pressure." He looked over and saw 2 assistant managers smirking in the direction of Alisha. That's when he noticed her, head slightly bowed, scanning groceries while her eyes glistened with tears. He paused near a shelf of batteries, pretending to restock, but really watching. A customer, a woman in her 50s, spoke harshly to Alisha about a mispriced item. Alisha apologized, voice shaking, and reached for the intercom to call for a supervisor. The moment she did, a sharp voice cut through the store. "Of course you'd mess it up again, Alisha," said Todd, the floor manager, walking up with clear irritation. "This is why you'll always be on checkout and never at the desk." His words sliced through the air like ice. The customer looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. James felt a heat rise in his chest. He followed Todd and asked where the break room was. "Why? You need a break already." Todd chuckled. James forced a smile and followed his directions. Later that day, during lunch, James sat with Alisha and gently asked if she was okay. She hesitated, then looked down and whispered, "It's nothing. I'm just tired." But her body language said everything else. When James pressed a bit more, Alisha finally spoke up, tears returning. "I've been here for a year. I show up early, stay late, help when they're short-staffed. But no matter what I do, they treat me like I'm invisible, or worse, like I'm a burden." James clenched his jaw. He asked if she had ever reported this. She shrugged. "To who? Todd is the one doing it. And when I tried to tell HR last month, they said I was probably just misunderstanding things. They told me to be more resilient." The cameras captured every word. And in that moment, James knew this wasn't just about one bad employee. It was about a culture he didn't realize had rotted beneath the surface. The following week, a mandatory meeting was called at Fairway Supermart. Employees were confused to see corporate executives walking in, but they were even more shocked when Jim, the new guy, walked up to the front of the room and took off his hat. "I'm James Alden," he said. Gasps filled the room. "And I've been working here undercover for the past week." He recounted what he saw, word for word, moment for moment, especially the public belittling of Alisha and the dismissive attitudes from management. The assistant managers looked pale. Todd, who was seated in the back, stood stiffly with folded arms. James then invited Alisha to the front. "This woman deserves better," he said, "not just as an employee, but as a human being." Alisha, stunned, walked up nervously. "Starting today," James said, "Alisha will be joining our customer relations team at the regional office. She will receive full training, paid mentorship, and a pathway to management, because someone with her work ethic and resilience deserves to be lifted up, not broken down." The room erupted in applause. As for Todd and the assistant managers, they were suspended pending a formal investigation and later removed for repeated policy violations and fostering a hostile work environment. Weeks later, Alisha stood confidently in her new role. She didn't scan groceries anymore. She trained new hires on how to treat customers and co-workers with dignity. Her story was quietly shared across other branches as a reminder, you never know who's watching, and no one deserves to be silenced for simply standing tall in a system that tried to shrink them. 2 months had passed since Alisha had been promoted, but the ripple effect of that day still echoed across Fairway Supermart's entire regional network. Word spread quickly, not just about the CEO going undercover, but about how he chose to respond. The employees who had once felt invisible began to whisper something new among themselves. Maybe things were actually going to change. Alisha adjusted to her new office job slowly at first. She'd spent years behind a register, her world defined by UPC codes, coupons, and condescending glances. Now she was sitting in meetings, analyzing customer feedback, and offering insight into frontline experiences that upper management had always misunderstood. But not everyone was happy. Behind closed doors, certain regional executives whispered that James had overreacted, that Alisha's story had made them look bad. One director, Gerald Monroe, privately believed Alisha had just been too sensitive and insisted that Todd's behavior had been exaggerated. He didn't say it outright, but his tone dripped with the same quiet prejudice Alisha had endured for years. James wasn't blind to it. In fact, that undercover experience had fundamentally changed him. It made him aware of how detached the upper leadership had become from the soul of the company, the people on the floor. So he launched Project Bridge, a new corporate initiative designed to connect executive leadership with day-to-day operations through direct mentorship. And to everyone's surprise, he put Alisha in charge. Her job? To visit store locations, observe employee dynamics, conduct anonymous interviews, and report directly to him. But her real mission was something deeper, to find and protect the next Alisha. At first, she was met with polite skepticism. Store managers smiled too hard when she arrived, carefully rehearsed her words, and coached their teams before her visits. But Alisha was smarter than that. She watched how workers interacted when managers weren't looking. She sat in break rooms, joined overnight shifts, and quietly listened. In one location, she found a young single mother named Carla being forced to clock out during slow hours, even though company policy forbade it. In another, she met an elderly janitor who hadn't had a raise in 9 years. She didn't just report these issues. She sat with each person, heard their full story, and worked to implement lasting change. But the backlash was building. Gerald Monroe, the regional director, began pushing back against Alisha's recommendations. He even tried to discredit her, accusing her of bias and favoritism. She's turning this into a personal crusade, he argued during a board meeting. She's emotionally compromised. James leaned forward, eyes fixed on Gerald. Emotionally compromised, he said slowly. Is it emotional to care when someone is mistreated? Because if that's a flaw, Gerald, maybe we need more flaws like Hayes, and fewer people who stay silent when others are suffering. The room went silent. James then made a bold move. He demoted Gerald and replaced him with someone from the front line, a store manager who had a reputation for fairness and team loyalty. It was a message to everyone in the company. Leadership wasn't about title or tenure anymore. It was about integrity. But even as the company transformed, Alisha faced her own inner doubts. She often found herself awake at night, wondering if she really belonged at the table now. The trauma of being belittled for so long had carved deep scars. Sometimes she heard Todd's voice in her head, questioning her worth. Sometimes she replayed moments where she'd said nothing at all, just to survive. One evening, James called her. "I know you probably hear enough from everyone," he said. "But I want you to hear this from me directly. I didn't just promote you because you were mistreated. I promoted you because you were the only one brave enough to speak truth where everyone else remained silent." She didn't say anything at first, just stared out her apartment window at the city lights. "You're not here by luck, Alisha," he added. "You're here because you earned it, and you're just getting started." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from belief, from power, from purpose. Weeks passed, and Alisha had grown into her role with surprising grace. The former cashier now walked confidently through corporate halls, her braids wrapped into a crown-like bun, clipboard in hand, questions ready. She had become more than an employee. She was a symbol, a presence, a pulse of accountability that many weren't ready for. Yet not all her victories were visible. Behind the scenes, resistance hardened. Late one evening, her company phone buzzed with a private message. "They are not telling you everything. Meet me outside the Northbridge location. Midnight." Attached was a blurry image, an old spreadsheet with manipulated payroll entries and timestamps. It was signed only with a letter, J. Despite the late hour, Alisha went. She arrived at the back entrance of the Northbridge store under flickering lights, heart pounding. A man stepped out of the shadows, Jason, a soft-spoken assistant stock supervisor with tired eyes and a guarded tone. "I'm risking a lot by talking to you," he whispered, checking over his shoulder. "But what's happening here? It's bigger than just mistreatment. This is theft. They've been skimming wages for over a year, changing timesheets, clocking people out early in the system while forcing them to work extra. And it's not just here." He handed her a flash drive. "I tried telling corporate," Jason said. "They buried it. So now I'm telling you." Alisha took it with trembling hands. "Thank you. I'll take it from here." Back in her apartment, she opened the files. What she found made her sick. Dozens of entries. Workers scheduled for 8 hours only paid for 6. Timestamps manually edited by managers. Bonus payouts rerouted to management accounts. This wasn't neglect. It was a cover-up. And among the digital signatures on the documents, one name stood out. Gerald Monroe, the same regional director who had tried to discredit her. The same man who had once called her emotionally compromised. The next morning, Alisha marched straight into James Alden's office. She laid the evidence on his desk without saying a word. James looked through the files, and his face darkened. This could bring down the whole region. "Then maybe it should," Alisha said, "because if we let this slide, what do we stand for?" James didn't hesitate. He launched a full-scale internal audit and ordered a third-party investigation. Gerald Monroe was suspended immediately. But that was just the beginning. The findings reached the media. Headlines rolled in. Major retail chain under fire for wage theft. Former cashier turned executive exposes corporate fraud. Alisha's face was suddenly everywhere. News articles, interviews, podcasts. Some praised her. Others doubted her. And still, a few powerful people within the company tried to paint her as a liability. The board called an emergency meeting. One member questioned whether her background gave her the right tool for leadership. Alisha stood, calm and unshaken. "Let me be clear. My background is exactly why I see what you've ignored for years. While you were watching spreadsheets, I was watching people struggle." A few board members nodded. Others looked away, shamed. James backed her fully. "She hasn't just proven herself," he said. "She's exposed everything that was wrong with our system. If we don't support her, we don't deserve her." But just when the dust seemed to settle, a letter arrived at Alisha's new office. No return address, no stamp, just her name on the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "You don't know everything yet. Look into store number 118. You'll see where it all began." No signature, only the initials again, J. Alisha narrowed her eyes. Store 118 had been shut down 2 years ago after fire. It was the only location that never reopened, and word around the office was that it had internal issues no one ever explained. She pulled up old files, but most of them were wiped, unavailable, sealed. She leaned back in her chair and whispered to herself, what really happened at store 118? That night, she booked a ticket, not as an executive, not as a leader, but as the same determined woman who once cried behind lane 6. She was going to find out. The town of Glenville was quiet when Alisha arrived. A small, blue-collar place with more boarded-up shops than open ones, where the shadows of old industry still clung to the brick walls and broken signs. Store number 118 sat at the far end of the main road, burnt, gutted, and long abandoned. Its parking lot was cracked, the sign rusted and half missing, reading simply, fair__sup__art. She stood in front of the building as wind tugged at her coat. Despite being shuttered, there was something about the store that felt alive, like a place with secrets that refused to die quietly. She wasn't alone. A man stepped out from a parked sedan. Worn jeans, gray hoodie, eyes sharp with caution. "You came," he said. Alisha recognized him from an old employee file, Jamal Turner, former assistant manager at store 118, fired during the investigation after the fire. Never heard from again. "I was the one who left you the letters," he admitted. "I had to know if you were serious." Alisha said. Jamal looked at the burnt-out store. Then you need to know the truth. Store 118 didn't burn down from faulty wiring. That was the cover-up. It was arson. Alisha's breath caught. You're saying it was intentional. He nodded, but not for insurance, for silence. 2 years ago, Jamal had discovered something inside Store 118. A massive payroll diversion scheme. Managers were creating ghost employees, funneling their wages into fake accounts. The fraud had reached nearly $1 million. When Jamal tried to report it, Gerald Monroe was the one who responded. But instead of launching an investigation, Jamal said, "He told me to stay quiet, said it wasn't my concern." When Jamal refused to cooperate, things got worse. He was suddenly blamed for inventory losses, accused of harassment, trumped up charges to get him fired. Days later, the store caught fire in the middle of the night. No one was hurt, but the records, security footage, and files were destroyed. Or so they thought. Jamal opened a duffel bag. Inside were backup drives he'd saved and hidden. Footage, pay logs, emails. Everything. "I've been carrying this for 2 years," he said. "Waiting for someone with power and a conscience. You're the first." Alisha took the bag with trembling hands. The weight of it wasn't just physical. It was legacy, evidence, justice waiting to happen. Back in her hotel room, she stayed up all night combing through the files. She found doctored timesheets, shell bank accounts, internal memos with Monroe's initials. But then, she found something even worse. A confidential document listing executive approvals. And there, signed in digital ink, was a name she never expected. William Alden, James's father, the former CEO, chairman of the board, her mentor's father. It was all deeper than she'd imagined. The next morning, Alisha flew back to headquarters. She didn't call James ahead of time. She needed to look him in the eyes, unsure of how he'd respond. She stepped into his office and laid the documents down. He flipped through the pages slowly, silently. Then he stopped, stared at the signature. James leaned back in his chair. His face looked older in seconds. "My father, he retired just after Star 118 closed." "You think he knew?" Alisha asked quietly. James closed his eyes. "If this is real, he didn't just know. He approved it." A heavy silence hung between them. "I need time," he said, "to figure out what comes next." But Alisha already knew what came next. She had to tell the board, the employees, the public, even if it meant tearing down the company that had finally let her rise. Because it was never about one promotion. It was about truth. And that truth came with a cost. That night, she made her decision. She called a press conference. Alone. The next day, news stations buzzed. Crowds gathered. Cameras clicked. Alisha stood at the podium outside Fairway headquarters, holding the duffel bag in one hand and her heart in the other. "I was once a cashier who cried behind lane 6, she said into the microphone. "Today, I stand here with evidence that proves Fairway Supermart's former leadership participated in wage theft, fraud, and a criminal cover-up of arson. Not everyone in this company knew, but some of the most powerful did. And that ends now." She named names. She showed the evidence. She offered apologies to every employee who had been silenced, stolen from, or dismissed. And then she did something no one expected. She resigned. "I can't rebuild a system while trapped inside the shell of its corruption. So I'm stepping down, not from the fight, but from the chains that tried to shape who I could be. And I'm building something new, for the people who do the real work, for the voices never heard." 1 year later, a new organization launched, Ground Level, an independent watchdog and worker advocacy group founded by Alisha and Jamal. It audited labor practices, provided legal aid, and trained young leaders from underserved communities. Fairway Supermart was forced to restructure. Several board members resigned. James stayed on, but now under the direction of an independent ethics committee. He and Alisha spoke occasionally, always with respect, sometimes with pain. Because stories like this don't have happy endings. They have true ones. And Alisha, she didn't become powerful. She became freed at IT started with tears, quiet ones, unnoticed by most. but not by him. James Alden, CEO of Fairway Supermart, had walked into one of his own stores disguised as a new employee. Hidden cameras, a fake name tag, and a borrowed uniform allowed him to blend in. It was part of an internal program meant to reconnect with his workforce. But what he saw that day changed everything. Behind checkout lane 6 was Alisha, a young black cashier working with poise, despite her hands trembling. A few customers were kind, but others were cold. One manager, Todd, barked criticisms at her like they were normal. "Maybe you're just not cut out for this," he had said, loud enough for customers to hear. James stood in frozen silence. Something twisted in his chest. This wasn't just bad behavior, it was cruelty. He watched as Alisha silently wiped away a tear and continued scanning. Later that day, he sat with her during break. She didn't recognize him as a CEO, just another tired new hire with kind eyes. At first, she said she was fine. But after a moment, she whispered, "I do everything right, but it's never enough. I work twice as hard, and they treat me like I don't exist." That night, James couldn't sleep. He had spent years building this company, believing in its culture, trusting his managers. But Alisha's pain exposed a crack running deeper than he'd imagined. The following week, he returned, not undercover, but as himself. He called a meeting, gathered the entire staff, and walked to the front in a full suit. Gasps echoed through the room when Jim the trainee revealed himself. He looked at Alisha. "You were never invisible. I see you. I hear you. And starting today, everything changes." Todd was fired on the spot. Other abusive staff were suspended pending investigation. Alisha was promoted, first to customer relations, then to a special task force aimed at protecting employee rights. But the story didn't end there. Alisha uncovered more. Managers doctoring timesheets, workers forced to clock out and continue laboring, a culture of silence that protected power and punished truth. One whistleblower, Jamal, stepped forward, revealing that an entire store, Fairway number 118, had been burned down to hide payroll fraud. The scheme reached the highest levels of leadership, implicating Gerald Monroe, a powerful regional director, and shockingly, James's own father, William Alden, the former CEO. Faced with this devastating truth, Alisha stood tall. She brought the evidence forward, not just to James, but to the public. In a bold move, she held a press conference and laid the truth bare for the world to see. Then, in an act of courage and clarity, she resigned. "I was once a cashier who cried behind lane 6, she said to cameras. "Today, I walk away from the company I helped fix to build something new for people like me. For those who aren't seen. For those who deserve more." She founded Ground Level, a worker rights organization that fought wage theft, promoted fair treatment, and helped empower the very people companies too often overlooked. James, humbled, remained CEO but under new oversight. He publicly thanked Alisha, saying, "She showed us the truth, and she reminded me why this company exists in the first place, not for profit, but for people." Alisha never returned to the register, but she never forgot where she started. She had been the tear no one noticed, and she became the voice no one could ignore.